The stars beyond the frontier veil were cold and empty. Nothing lived out here. Nothing worth finding. Nothing worth fighting. That was what the crew of the UEN Adamantine had believed for the past 4 months of their patrol, and most of them had made peace with the boredom. Admiral Rena Voss stood on the bridge of the dreadnought carrier, her hands clasped behind her back, watching the darkness scroll across the main viewport. She was a tall woman with hard gray eyes and a scar that ran from her left temple down to her jaw, a gift from a mining colony riot 15 years ago, back when she was still young enough to lead from the front. She had not bothered to have it removed. Scars reminded you of things that mattered. The Adamantine was the flagship of Battle Group Talon, 12 ships of the United Earth Navy, assigned to patrol the outermost edge of known space. It was the kind of duty that the Galactic Conquered loved to give to humans, far from populated systems, far from civilized species, far from anyone who might be uncomfortable sharing a station with Deathworlders. 40 years. That was how long humanity had been part of the Conquered. 40 years since first contact, since a Velthari survey ship had stumbled into the Sol system and nearly suffered a collective heart attack when they realized the third planet was a Class 12 death world. A planet of crushing gravity, toxic atmosphere, extreme temperatures, and an ecosystem so violent that every living thing on it had evolved to either kill or endure being killed. And the dominant species had not only survived this nightmare world, they had thrived on it. They had built cities on it. They had split the atom, mapped their own genome, and reached for the stars, all while living on a planet that most galactic species would classify as uninhabitable. The galaxy had not known what to do with humans. They were too strong, too fast, too durable. They healed from wounds that would kill a Velthari. They could survive temperature ranges that would shut down a Korathi nervous system. They ate things that were technically poisonous. They drank ethanol for fun. And worst of all, they had spent their entire history fighting each other with a creativity and ferocity that made the Conquered's military theorists lose sleep. So the galaxy kept them at arm's length, gave them a seat at the table, but made sure the table was very, very long. Voss understood this. She did not resent it. Resentment was a waste of energy, and she had never been the type to waste anything. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Priya Nair from the communications station, "we are picking up something strange." Voss turned, "Define strange." "A signal, ma'am. Conquered standard emergency format, but it is coming from beyond the veil, way beyond. The signal is old, at least 3 weeks based on the decay. It has been repeating on a loop, getting weaker each cycle. Can you clean it up?" Nair worked her console for a few minutes, her fingers moving quickly over the haptic interface. The bridge was quiet. The other officers had stopped what they were doing and were watching. A distress signal from beyond map space was not something you heard every day. It was not something you heard ever. "Got it," Nair said. She put it on the main speakers. The voice that filled the bridge was thin and musical. The translator rendered it in soft, chiming tones. Velthari. The words were broken up by static, but the meaning was clear enough. "This is Scholar Prime Yuvan of the Velthari Exploratory Flotilla. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces in the Kethsoron system. Our ships are destroyed. We have survivors on the 4th planet. We cannot defend ourselves. Please. If anyone can hear this, we need help. They are killing us. They are eating our ships. Please send help." The message ended. Then it started again from the beginning, exactly the same words, exactly the same desperate voice. The bridge was silent. Commander des Akaffer, Voss's executive officer, was the first to speak. He was a big man with dark skin and thoughtful eyes, the kind of officer who always considered every angle before opening his mouth. "Conquered protocol says we log it and report it. They will send a diplomatic probe." "In 6 to 8 months, Voss said flatly. "Yes, ma'am." "The signal is 3 weeks old. Those survivors have been sitting on a frozen rock for 3 weeks, waiting for someone to come. It could be a trap, HFY said, because it was his job to say it. It could be, Voss agreed. We would be taking the entire battle group beyond map space. No support, no resupply, no backup. I am aware. The Velthari are not our allies. They barely acknowledge us at conquered functions. Half of them think we are barbarians. Voss almost smiled. That is true. So why would we risk 12 ships and 8,000 crew for a species that looks at us like we are animals? Voss turned back to the viewport. The stars stared back at her, cold and indifferent. Somewhere out there in the dark, people were dying. They were not human people. They were strange, fragile, crystalline beings who ate sunlight and spoke in songs and had never held a weapon in their lives. They were everything that humans were not. And they were alone and afraid, and no one was coming for them. No one except the monsters. Helm, Voss said quietly, set a course for the Kethzoran system. All ships battle formation, spin up the skip drives. Admiral HFY started. If it is a trap, Commander, then whoever said it does not know what they just caught. She looked at him, and there was something in her gray eyes that was not quite anger and not quite sorrow. It was older than both. We are going. The fleet turned. 12 ships of the United Earth Navy, built by a species that the galaxy called Deathworlders, aimed their bows at the unknown dark and began to accelerate. Nair was about to close the signal when the ship's AI flagged something. A second layer buried beneath the distress call, hidden in the subharmonic frequencies. It was not in any conquered language. The AI took several minutes to decode it, pulling from linguistic databases that covered over 4,000 known species. The translation appeared on Nair's screen. She read it twice, then a third time because she wanted to be wrong. She was not wrong. Admiral, she said, and her voice had changed. There is a second message underneath the distress call. It is not from the Velthari. It is from something else. Something that was already in that system before the flotilla arrived. What does it say? Nair swallowed. It says, do not come, it eats worlds. The bridge went very still. Voss read the translation on the main display. She read it carefully, the way she read everything, with patience and without fear. Then she nodded once, as if the message had confirmed something she had already suspected. Increase speed to maximum, she said. We are not slowing down. The adamantine and her fleet plunged into the dark, skip drives howling, racing towards something that ate worlds. Behind them, the cold stars of the frontier veil watched them go and said nothing. They never do. The fleet dropped out of skip space and fell into a graveyard. That was the only word for it. The Kethzoran system was a trinary, 3 suns orbiting each other in a slow, ancient dance, casting light in shades of gold and amber across 7 dead planets. But the light did not touch the darkness that filled the space between those worlds. That darkness was made of wreckage. Debris clouds stretched across hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Pieces of ships, crystalline ships, beautiful ships, tumbled slowly through the void, catching the triple sunlight and throwing it back in broken rainbows. There were 14 ships in the Velthari exploratory flotilla. All 14 were destroyed. Their remains drifted in silence, shattered into pieces so small that the scanners had trouble telling ship from asteroid. On the bridge of the adamantine, no one spoke. The main viewport showed a field of glittering destruction that went on in every direction, like someone had taken a cathedral made of glass and smashed it with a hammer the size of a moon. Life signs? Voss asked. Lieutenant Nair shook her head slowly, her face pale in the glow of her instruments. Nothing in the debris field, Admiral. Thousands dead, but... She paused, adjusted her readings, checked them again. There is something on the 4th planet, 1 ship. It went down hard, the hull is cracked open, but I am reading faint life signs inside. Velthari biosignatures, maybe 40 or 50. Voss looked at the planet on the tactical display. It was a frozen ball of rock and methane ice. wrapped in a toxic atmosphere that would kill an unprotected human in about 4 minutes and an unprotected Velthari in about 30 seconds. Not a place anyone would choose to crash land. But when you were running from something that ate your fleet, you did not get to choose. "Get me Sergeant Major Tanaka," Voss said. Kira Tanaka was already suiting up when the call came. She was in the Marine Bay on Deck 7, pulling on her combat armor with the easy, practiced motions of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. She was not a tall woman, but she was built like a weapon, compact, dense, every muscle and bone reinforced with military-grade augmentations that made her roughly 3 times stronger and twice as fast as a baseline human. Her eyes were dark brown and very calm, the way deep water is calm. "Sergeant Major, take your team down to the surface. Find the survivors. Bring them back alive." "Understood, Admiral. Rules of engagement. If it is not human, and it is not Velthari, kill it." Tanaka smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Yes, ma'am." 3 dropships launched from the adamantine's belly, cutting through the methane atmosphere like knives through dirty cloth. The ride was rough. The planet's winds were fierce and full of ice crystals that scraped against the hull like fingernails on metal. The Marines sat in their crash harnesses and said nothing. They had done worse drops on worse worlds. Earth had trained them for that. They found the Velthari ship half buried in a ridge of frozen methane, its crystalline hull cracked like an egg. The research vessel illumination of currents, once a thing of beauty, a ship that sang with light, was now a broken wreck leaking atmosphere into a sky the color of poison. Tanaka's Marines cut through the outer hull and moved inside with weapons raised. The interior was dark and cold. Frost covered everything. The crystal walls, which should have glowed with warm inner light, were dead and gray. They found the survivors in a sealed compartment deep in the ship's core, 47 Velthari huddled together in a space meant for 10. They were tall, thin beings with translucent skin that showed the faint glow of their internal organs. Their large, dark eyes blinked in the sudden light of marine helmet lamps. They looked like creatures made of moonlight and glass, fragile and beautiful and completely, utterly helpless. Their leader rose to meet the humans. Scholar Prime Yuvan was old for a Velthari, his skin had lost most of its luminescence, and his movements were slow and careful. But his eyes were sharp, and his voice, when he spoke, was steady. "You came," he said, and the translator turned his chiming words into flat English. "We did not believe anyone would come." "We heard your signal," Tanaka said. "What happened here?" Yuvan told them. The flotilla had been surveying the Keth-Soron system, a routine scientific mission, the kind the Velthari had conducted for centuries. They were cataloging minerals, mapping gravitational fields, studying the trinary star interaction. Peaceful work, safe work. And then the sky had opened and something had come through. Ships, hundreds of ships, but not ships like anything the Velthari had ever seen. These were organic living things, covered in black chitin that absorbed light, radiating energy that made Velthari crystal technology go dark on contact. They moved like a swarm of insects, fast and coordinated and hungry. "They did not speak to us," Yuvan said. His voice was flat now, drained of emotion. "They did not warn us or demand our surrender. They simply began to feed. They consumed our ships. They consumed our people. They broke our hulls open and absorbed everything inside. Metal, crystal, flesh, it did not matter. They ate it all." The Marines listened in silence. They had heard stories of alien horrors before, but there was something about the way Yuvan spoke, the dead calm of a person who had watched everything he loved be devoured, that made even battle-hardened soldiers feel cold. "We call them the Scorth," Yuvan continued. "We do not know their real name. I do not think they have one. I do not think they need one." Back on the Adamantine, Commander Akafer was analyzing the wreckage when the long-range sensors began to scream. A gravity distortion, massive, growing, building at the edge of the system like a wave before it breaks. Something was coming out of deep space, and it was coming fast. Admiral HFY said, his voice tight and controlled. "We have incoming, a lot of incoming." The tactical display updated. Red icons began to appear at the system's edge, first dozens, then hundreds, then more. The computer counted them as they arrived, each one a ship, each ship a living organism of black chitin and blind hunger. The count passed 500, then 1,000, then 1,500. 2,000 and climbing, Nair reported. Her voice was barely a whisper. And then the sensors found something else. Something at the center of the swarm that was so large the computer initially classified it as a planetoid. It was not a planetoid. It was alive. A single organism the size of a small moon, covered in the same black chitin as the smaller ships but pulsing with a deep bioluminescent glow, veins of sick green light running across its surface like rivers of poison. The hive mother. The spawning heart of the Scorth swarm, the thing that ate worlds. Voss stared at the display for a long time. 2,000 ships, a creature the size of a moon, and she had 12 ships and 8,000 crew sitting in a graveyard at the edge of nowhere. She opened a channel to all ships. Every speaker on every vessel in the battle group carried her voice. "This is Admiral Voss. I know what you are looking at on your screens. I know the numbers. I know what any sane commander would do right now. She would run. She would take the fleet and she would run, and no one in the galaxy would blame her for it." A pause. The fleet held its breath. "We are not running. There are 47 people on that planet who have been waiting 3 weeks for someone to come and save them. We are those people. We hold this system until every last one of them is off that rock and safe on our ships. Begin fortification. We have 9 hours. She closed the channel. The fleet moved. On the surface, Tanaka received the update on her helmet display. She read the numbers twice. Then she looked at the 47 Velthari survivors, fragile and shivering and looking at her with those big, dark, hopeful eyes. She keyed her comm. "Copy, Admiral, we will be ready." She turned to her Marines. "You heard the boss, dig in, we have company coming." Nobody argued. Nobody hesitated. They were Deathworlders, and Deathworlders did not run from the dark. They were the thing the dark ran from. 9 hours. That was what they had. 9 hours to turn a dead star system into a killing ground. Admiral Voss stood at the center of the Adamantine's war room, a circular chamber deep in the ship's armored core where holographic displays painted the air with light. Around her, her senior officers worked with the focused intensity of people who understood exactly how much trouble they were in and had decided to be angry about it instead of afraid. "Doctrine Obsidian," Voss said. The room went quiet. Commander HFY looked up from his console, and for the first time since Voss had known him, she saw surprise on his face. "Admiral, Doctrine Obsidian has never been activated. It is a theoretical framework. It was designed for extinction-level threats," Voss finished. "I know what it was designed for, Commander. Look at your screen and tell me that does not qualify." HFY looked at the 2,000 red icons creeping toward them across the system map. He looked at the hive mother, that pulsing nightmare at the center of the swarm. He closed his mouth and nodded. "Doctrine Obsidian," he confirmed. "All ships, all weapons, no restrictions." Doctrine Obsidian was humanity's darkest secret. Every species in the galaxy knew that humans were dangerous. That was common knowledge, the kind of thing conquered diplomats whispered about at formal dinners. But none of them knew just how dangerous. None of them knew what the United Earth Navy had been building in the quiet decades since first contact, when human strategists had looked at the galaxy's civilized species and realized something terrifying. They were all soft. All of them. Every single spacefaring species in the conquered had evolved on gentle worlds with mild climates and cooperative ecosystems. They had never needed to develop the science of killing. They had police forces. They had diplomatic corps. But they did not have war, not the way humans understood it. And so humanity had prepared in secret for the day when something came out of the dark that the galaxy could not talk to or reason with, something that could only be answered with violence. That day had arrived. The fleet went to work. The Adamantine's fabrication bays, massive automated factories that ran along the ship's spine, began producing kinetic kill satellites at a rate of one every 4 minutes. Each satellite was simple, a tungsten rod the length of a car, wrapped around a micro-skip-drive core that could accelerate it to a fraction of light speed. Simple, brutal, and devastating. A single rod hitting a target at that speed released energy equal to a small nuclear weapon. The satellites were deployed by the dozens, seeded across the system's approaches in overlapping fields of fire. The destroyers laid nuclear minefields, thousands of warheads suspended in precise geometric patterns across 3 orbital planes, each mine connected to its neighbors by a sensor net that would trigger chain detonations when anything organic passed through. The mines were not elegant. They were not sophisticated. They were very, very effective. The cruisers positioned themselves at key points along the approach vectors, their railguns charged, their missile bays loaded with everything from standard high-explosive warheads to experimental antimatter packages that the Navy had never officially admitted existed. And the 2 stealth frigates, the UEN Silence and the UEN Absence, vanished. They activated their cloaking systems and slipped away from the fleet, becoming invisible to every sensor in the system. They would reappear when the time was right, and not before. On the planet's surface, Sergeant Major Tanaka turned the crash site into a fortress. Her Marines set up portable shield generators in a ring around the wrecked Velthari ship, creating overlapping energy barriers that could stop anything short of a direct orbital strike. Automated turret networks were bolted to frozen rock and pointed at the sky. Fields of anti-personnel mines were buried in the methane ice. Fire lanes were cleared, fallback positions were marked, and ammunition was stacked in careful piles behind every piece of cover. The Velthari watched all of this with wide, horrified eyes. Scholar Prime Yuvan stood at the edge of the marine perimeter and watched a human soldier, a young woman who could not have been older than 25, assemble a crew-served plasma cannon with the same easy comfort that a Velthari might use to arrange flowers. The soldier hummed a tune while she worked. She was smiling. Yuvan had studied many species in his long career. He had cataloged ecosystems on 40 different worlds. He understood, in an academic sense, what a Deathworld species was. But understanding it in theory and watching it in practice were very different things. These creatures were not just strong. They were not just fast. They were built for this. Every part of them, from their dense bones to their binocular predator eyes to their ability to function without sleep for days, was the product of a world that had spent 4 billion years trying to kill everything on it. And instead of breaking them, that world had made them into something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that was comfortable with violence the way a fish was comfortable with water. It was not that they enjoyed it, Yuvan realized. It was that they were not afraid of it. Violence was a tool to them, as natural as breathing. They did not need to overcome fear to fight. They needed to overcome restraint. And right now, they were not restraining anything. "You are afraid of us," said a voice beside him. Yuvan turned. A human marine stood there, small for her kind, with dark eyes and armor that was scratched and dented from years of use. Sergeant Major Tanaka. She held 2 cups of something hot and steaming and offered one to him. "It is coffee," she said. "It will not poison you, probably." Yuvan took the cup with careful, translucent hands. The warmth felt strange against his skin. "I am not afraid of you," he said. "I am afraid of what you represent." "And what is that?" "A universe where beings like you are necessary." Tanaka considered this. She sipped her coffee and looked up at the toxic sky, where somewhere beyond the methane clouds, 2,000 hungry nightmares were getting closer by the hour. "That is fair," she said. A young Velthari approached them, Liyueth, barely an adult by their species standards, with skin that still glowed brightly. Liyueth had been watching the Marines with a mixture of terror and fascination, the way a child might watch a thunderstorm. "How can you be so calm?" Liyueth asked. "You know what is coming, you have seen the numbers. How can any of you be calm?" Tanaka looked at the young alien for a long moment. "We are not calm," she said. "We are angry. There is a difference. Calm means you do not feel anything. Anger means you feel everything and you point it at the thing that deserves it." She gestured at the sky. "That thing up there killed your people. It ate them. And it is going to try to do the same to you and to us and to every living thing it finds until someone stops it. We are very, very angry about that. And angry humans are the most dangerous thing in this galaxy." Up on the adamantine, Akafar had finished his analysis of the Skorth biomatter collected from the wreckage. What he found made his blood run cold. The Skorth were not simply predators. They were a self-replicating biological machine, a von Neumann swarm built from living tissue instead of metal. Each ship was an organism. Each organism could feed on raw matter and energy and use it to grow, to divide, to make more of itself. And the hive mother was the factory. She took in resources and produced new Skorth at a rate that defied understanding. If she reached conquered space, with its billions of inhabitants, its undefended worlds, its species that had never known war, she would consume everything. Sector by sector, world by world, until there was nothing left but the swarm and the silence. Akafar brought the analysis to Voss. She read it without expression, the same way she read everything. Then she sat back in her command chair and was silent for a long time. "This is not a rescue mission anymore," she said finally. "No, Admiral, it is not. This is a fire break. We stop them here or they do not get stopped." She opened a tight beam communicator. A focused, encrypted signal pointed back toward conquered space. It would take weeks to arrive, but it needed to be sent. She recorded a single message. "This is Admiral Voss, UEN Adamantine. We have encountered a Class Omega biological threat beyond the frontier veil. Von Neumann swarm, self-replicating, hostile. If we fail to contain it here, execute scorched earth protocols on all systems between the veil and the inner worlds. Leave them nothing to consume. Voss out." She closed the channel. She did not record a personal message. She did not say goodbye to anyone. There was no time for that, and she had never been the type. The countdown continued. 6 hours became 4, 4 became 2, 2 became 1. The fleet was ready. The mines were laid. The satellites were armed. The Marines were dug in. Everything that could be done had been done. And then the edge of the system lit up. Sensors screamed. The darkness split open and the Skorth poured through, a wall of black chitin and hungry light, 2,000 strong, with the hive mother at their center like a tumor in the heart of a storm. Voss stood on her bridge, watching them come, and felt nothing but the cold, clean clarity that came before battle. "All ships," she said, "weapons free." The first wave of Skorth hit the kinetic kill field at full speed, and the darkness became light. Tungsten rods fired from their satellite platforms at a fraction of light speed, crossing thousands of kilometers in heartbeats. Each impact was a sun being born and dying in the same instant, a flash of white so bright that the adamantine's viewport automatically dimmed to protect the crew's eyes. The rods punched through Skorth bioships like needles through wet paper, and the organisms behind them detonated from the energy transfer, spraying superheated organic matter in every direction. 30 Skorth ships died in the first 3 seconds, 50 more in the next 10. The kill field was doing exactly what it had been designed to do, turning the approach corridor into a slaughterhouse. But the Skorth were not stupid. They were not even really animals, not in any way that humans understood the word. They were a swarm intelligence, a billion tiny minds connected to one massive one, and they learned fast. The second wave did not fly in a straight line. They dispersed, spreading out across millions of cubic kilometers, sacrificing their smallest organisms as shields, sending them ahead to absorb the tungsten rods while the larger ships slipped through the gaps. The kill field chewed through the shields and kept firing, but now it was hitting bait instead of targets. The satellites ran dry one by one, their ammunition spent, and the Scorth flowed around them like water around stones. Kill satellites at 30% and falling, Nair reported from her station. The swarm is adapting. Expected, Voss said. Activate the minefields. The nuclear mines detonated in sequence, not individually, but in cascading chains that turned entire orbital planes into walls of nuclear fire. The Scorth flew into them and burned. Hundreds of them, caught in overlapping blast waves, were torn apart or cooked alive by radiation that their chitin armor could not absorb. The void filled with the dying glow of nuclear detonations and the tumbling corpses of alien organisms that had never expected their prey to bite back this hard. But the swarm kept coming. 2,000 ships could absorb losses that would have shattered any conventional fleet. For every Scorth that died, the rest adjusted, shifted, found new paths through the fire. They were a living thing, and living things did not stop because they were hurt. They stopped when they were dead. Minefields breached, Akafor said. Forward elements of the swarm entering weapons range in 4 minutes. Voss nodded. All ships form battle line. The adamantine takes center, cruisers on the flanks, destroyers in screen formation. We hold here. The fleet arranged itself with mechanical precision. 12 ships drawn up in a line across the Scorth's path like a wall of steel and fury. It was an old formation, older than spaceflight, older than gunpowder. It was the way humans had always fought when they had nowhere to retreat, shoulder to shoulder, facing the enemy, daring them to come closer. The Scorth accepted the dare. They came in a wave that filled the viewport from edge to edge. A living wall of black chitin and green bioluminescence, thousands of organisms moving in terrible coordination, and the human fleet opened fire with everything it had. Railguns thundered, sending streams of hypervelocity slugs into the swarm. Plasma lances cut burning lines through clusters of Scorth ships, boiling them from the inside out. Missile swarms launched in salvos of hundreds, their warheads splitting into submunitions that sought individual targets and detonated on contact. Point defense networks created interlocking fields of shrapnel and automatic fire that shredded anything that came within close range. The space between the fleet and the swarm became a hell of light and sound and death. Scorth ships exploded by the dozens, their organic hulls splitting open to spill glowing ichor into the vacuum. Pieces of dead aliens tumbled through the crossfire, still twitching, still trying to move even as they burned. And still they came. The Scorth answered human weapons with their own. Bioacid projectiles, globules of corrosive matter launched from living turrets, splashed against human shields and ate through them like acid through cloth. Electromagnetic pulse tendrils reached out from larger Scorth organisms and wrapped around human ships, trying to shut down their systems. And the worst were the ramming organisms. Eyeless, mindless torpedo creatures that accelerated to insane speeds and threw themselves at the fleet's hulls, detonating on impact with enough force to crack armored plating. The destroyer HFY Ferris was the first to die. 3 ramming organisms hit her in quick succession, bow, midship, and engineering. The third impact breached her reactor containment. She went up in a flash of white light that briefly outshone the triple suns, and 412 people vanished with her. Ferris is gone, Nair said. Her voice cracked on the word gone. Voss did not look away from the tactical display. She could not afford to close the gap, redistribute fire to cover her sector. The cruiser HFY Mandate took a cluster of acid projectiles to her port engine array. The corrosive matter ate through the armor and reached the drive systems beneath. Explosions rippled along her flank and she began to list, trailing fire and debris. Her captain reported that she was losing atmosphere on 6 decks, but was still in the fight. Mandate pull back to the second line, Voss ordered. You are our reserve now. Negative, Admiral, Captain Torres replied over the comm, her voice steady despite the alarm screaming behind her. We have weapons and we have crew. We are staying in the line. Voss did not argue, she understood. Then the stealth frigate struck. The UEN silence and the UEN absence had been drifting behind the Scorth formation for over an hour, invisible, patient, waiting for the moment when the swarm's attention was fully focused on the battle line ahead. That moment had come. They decloaked simultaneously, appearing like ghosts in the swarm's rear, and launched their payloads. Antimatter warheads, 4 from each ship, aimed directly at the cluster of escort organisms surrounding the hive mother. 8 antimatter detonations. 8 small stars born in the space around the hive mother's flank. The blast wave tore through over 100 escort organisms, vaporizing them instantly, and for the first time, the hive mother's armored hide was exposed. The swarm reacted with fury. Hundreds of Scorth ships broke off from the main attack and swarmed the 2 frigates. Silence managed to recloak and slip away. Absence was not so lucky. A dozen ramming organisms hit her before she could vanish. She broke apart in silence, 48 crew lost. On the surface of the 4th planet, the ground war had begun. Scorth landing organisms, massive beetle-like creatures the size of houses, crashed through the methane atmosphere and slammed into the frozen ground around the marine perimeter. They split open on impact, releasing swarms of smaller ground drones, fast, chitinous things with cutting limbs and acid sacs and no fear of anything. Tanaka's Marines met them with fire and fury. The automated turrets opened up first, filling the air with plasma bolts and high-velocity rounds that cut down the first wave of drones before they reached the shield perimeter. Then the drones adapted, coming from multiple directions, burrowing under the frozen ground to emerge inside the defensive ring. Close-quarters combat, the worst kind. The kind where augmented humans and alien nightmares met face-to-face in the dark and the cold, and the only thing that mattered was who was faster, stronger, and more willing to die. The Marines were all 3. Tanaka moved through the chaos like a force of nature. Her augmented muscles drove her combat knife through Scorth chitin that should have been too thick to penetrate. Her enhanced reflexes let her dodge acid sprays that would have dissolved her armor. She killed with efficiency and without hesitation, a lifetime of training and combat distilled into pure, focused violence. Liyueth, the young Velthari, huddled in the shelter of the wrecked ship and watched through a crack in the hull. A Marine, a woman barely larger than Liyueth, caught a Scorth drone by its cutting limb, wrenched it sideways with a sound of cracking chitin, and tore the creature apart with her bare, augmented hands. The drone was twice her size. She killed it in 3 seconds and moved to the next one without pausing. Liyueth began to weep, not from fear. The fear had burned out days ago. Liyueth wept because of something far more overwhelming, the sudden, crushing understanding that these Deathworlders, these terrifying beings that the galaxy kept at arm's length, had come here knowing they would die. They had crossed the void and walked into a nightmare, not for allies, not for reward, not for anything except the simple fact that strangers needed help and no one else was coming. Back in space, Voss looked at the tactical display and saw the truth that she had known since the beginning. Conventional weapons could hurt the swarm. They could kill hundreds, even thousands of individual organisms. But the hive mother was still alive, and as long as she lived, she was producing new Scorth faster than the fleet could kill them. The spawning vents on her surface opened every few minutes, and each time they did, dozens of fresh organisms emerged, wet and glistening and hungry. There was only one way to end this. Commander Akafor, Voss said, and her voice was very quiet. Begin evacuation of non-essential crew, transfer them to the remaining ships. Akafor looked at her, he understood immediately. Admiral, I need 40 volunteers to stay aboard for a skeleton crew. The rest go. Every person on this ship will volunteer. I know, pick 40 and do it fast. The evacuation took 20 minutes. Shuttles and escape pods launched from the adamantine in streams, racing toward the other ships in the fleet. On board, the skeleton crew of 40 volunteers took their stations and prepared for what came next. Voss opened the ship-wide comm one last time to the 40 people who had chosen to stay. You know what we are about to do. I will not insult you with a speech. You are here because you chose to be. That is enough. She turned to the helm officer. Spin up the skip drive. Calculate a micro-jump. Destination, the interior of the Hive Mother. The helm officer's hands trembled, then they steadied. Course plotted, Admiral, ready on your order. The fleet poured covering fire into the swarm, every ship burning through its remaining ammunition to clear a path. Scorth ships died by the score, opening a corridor of fire and ruin between the adamantine and the Hive Mother. Voss looked at the creature on her screen, that moon-sized abomination of chitin and hunger, the thing that ate worlds. She looked at it the way she looked at everything, without fear. Jump, she said. The adamantine vanished in a flash of twisted spacetime. One moment she was there, 200 meters of human warship, bristling with weapons, scarred from battle. The next moment she was gone. She reappeared inside the Hive Mother. The bridge viewport showed a cathedral of living tissue, walls of pulsing meat and glowing veins stretching away in every direction, organs the size of buildings throbbing with awful life. The air inside was thick with spores and heat, and the sound of something vast and alive and angry. Voss looked at it all. She breathed once. She reached for the detonation controls. For the Velthari, she said, for the Ferris, for the Absence, for every poor soul this thing has ever eaten. She keyed the ship-wide comm. Detonate. The adamantine skip-drive core was never designed to be detonated. It was designed to fold space, to bend the fabric of reality just enough to move a ship from one point to another faster than light. But a skip-drive core that was deliberately overloaded did not fold space. It tore it. The detonation happened inside the Hive Mother's body, and the effect was something that had no name in any language spoken by any species in the galaxy. A sphere of distorted spacetime expanded outward from the adamantine's core at the speed of light, and everything it touched was unmade. Not destroyed, unmade. Matter was pulled apart at the molecular level. Energy was scattered into frequencies that could not sustain organized structure. The Hive Mother's biological architecture, billions of years of evolution compressed into a single, continent-sized organism, came apart like wet sand in a river. The Hive Mother screamed. Not through sound, there was no air inside her to carry it, but through the psionic link that connected her to every Scorth organism in the system. It was a scream that every living thing within 10 light minutes felt in some deep, primal part of their brain. On the bridge of every human ship, crew members flinched and grabbed their heads. On the planet's surface, Marines staggered. The Velthari collapsed. And then it stopped, because the thing that was screaming no longer existed. The Hive Mother died in stages. First the core, where the adamantine had been, where Voss and her 40 volunteers had spent their last heartbeat, turned to ash and light. Then the wave expanded outward, cracking the chitin shell, boiling the organic fluid that served as the creature's blood, rupturing the spawning chambers where new Scorth had been growing in their thousands. The Hive Mother split open like a fruit dropped from a great height, and the pieces that tumbled away from each other were already dead before they began to drift. And through the psionic link, the death traveled. 2,000 Scorth ships felt their mother die, and they died with her. The link was not just communication. It was the thing that held them together, the signal that told each organism how to move, how to hunt, how to function. Without it, they were nothing. The smaller organisms simply stopped, their internal systems shutting down in an instant, leaving them to drift as lifeless husks. The larger ships convulsed, their organic systems going into cascade failure, tearing themselves apart from the inside. Some rammed into each other in their death spasms. Some flew into the minefields that still flickered at the system's edge and were torn to pieces. In the space of 5 minutes, the Scorth swarm, the thing that ate worlds, the horror from beyond the veil, the extinction-level threat that could have consumed the entire Concord, was gone. On the surface of the fourth planet, Sergeant Major Tanaka watched the last Scorth ground drone fall. The creature had been charging toward the marine perimeter when the psionic shockwave hit. It stumbled, its legs folding beneath it, its cutting limbs going slack. It crashed into the frozen ground and slid to a stop 3 meters from Tanaka's boots. Its eyes, if those dark, glassy orbs could be called eyes, went dim. Tanaka stood there for a long moment looking at it. Then she sat down heavily on a piece of frozen rock, set her rifle across her knees, and was very, very still. Around her, the other Marines did the same. The turrets fell silent. The shield generators hummed in the sudden quiet. The battle was over, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. Liyueth came out of the wrecked ship on shaking legs. The young Velthari looked at the field of dead Scorth, at the exhausted Marines sitting among them, at the sky that was finally empty of nightmares. Liyueth walked to where Tanaka sat and stood beside her, saying nothing, because there was nothing to say. Tanaka looked up at the alien. The Velthari's skin was glowing again, faintly, like a candle coming back to life after a gust of wind. "Is it over?" Liyueth asked. "Yeah," Tanaka said. Her voice was hoarse. "It is over." The cost was waiting for them when the numbers came in. The adamantine gone. Admiral Rena Voss and her 40 volunteers gone. Not captured, not missing, not recoverable. Gone in the most complete way that anything could be gone, reduced to scattered atoms inside the corpse of the thing they had killed. The destroyer Ferris gone, 412 crew. The stealth frigate Absence gone, 48 crew. The cruiser Mandate crippled beyond repair, her hull held together by emergency force fields and stubbornness. She would never fly again. Of the 12 ships that had entered the Keth-Sauron system, 9 could still move under their own power. 314 additional crew had been killed across the fleet from combat damage. The total count of human dead was 814. 814 people who had woken up that morning on a routine patrol. 814 people who had heard a distress signal from strangers and had gone to help. 814 people who would never go home. Commander Akaffer assumed command of the fleet. He was not ready for it. No one ever was. But the fleet needed a commander, and he was the one standing, so he stood. The surviving ships gathered the Velthari from the planet's surface, all 47 of them, thin and fragile and alive, because 814 humans had decided that their lives mattered. The evacuation was gentle. Marines who had been killing nightmares an hour ago carried Velthari survivors on stretchers with hands as careful as any nurse. Scholar Prime Yuvan requested permission to travel aboard a human ship for the journey home rather than being transferred to a conquered medical vessel. Akaffer granted it without hesitation. Yuvan was given quarters on the cruiser Resolve, and he spent the first 3 days of the journey in silence, sitting alone, staring at nothing. On the 4th day, he asked to see the Adamantine's final sensor logs. They had been transmitted to the fleet in a compressed burst in the seconds before detonation, standard protocol. The kind of thing human ships did automatically because humans always planned for the possibility that they might not survive. Everything was recorded. Everything was preserved. Yuvan watched the logs alone in his quarters. He watched the adamantine jump into the hive mother. He watched the bridge cameras capture the moment of arrival, the walls of living tissue, the impossible interior of a creature the size of a moon. He watched the crew at their stations, steady and focused, not one of them trying to run, not one of them breaking down. And he watched Admiral Voss. In the final seconds, the camera caught her face. She was not smiling. She was not crying. She was not afraid. She looked exactly the way she had looked on the bridge during the briefing, during the battle. During every moment Yuvan had seen her calm, resolute, certain. A woman who had made her decision long ago and had never wavered from it. She had known. From the moment she turned the fleet toward Keth Sauron, she had known this was how it might end. She had come anyway. She had brought her people into the dark, knowing the dark might swallow them. Because somewhere in that dark, there were strangers who needed help. Yuvan closed the logs. He sat in silence for a long time. Then he began to write. The fleet arrived at Concord Station, Meridian 6 weeks later. News of the battle had traveled ahead of them. Fragments of Voss's warning transmission had been intercepted by Concord listening posts, and rumors had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. By the time the battered human ships limped into the docking ring, half the Concord knew what had happened at Keth Sauron. The docking ring was lined with people. Representatives of dozens of species stood in silence as the human fleet came in, scorched, dented, missing pieces, trailing debris. The cruiser Mandate had to be towed in by 2 tugboats. She looked like a skeleton held together by prayers. No one spoke. No one cheered. The silence was more powerful than any applause could have been. 3 days later, Scholar Prime Yuvan stood before the Concord Assembly. The chamber was vast, a dome of crystal and light that could hold representatives of every spacefaring species in known space. It was full. Every seat was taken. Every screen in the Concord carried the broadcast. Yuvan was old and tired and still grieving, but his voice was clear. "I have come to tell you about the Battle of Keth Sauron," he began. "I have come to tell you about the Scorth and the threat they pose to every living being in this galaxy. But more than that, I have come to tell you about the humans." The chamber was silent. "We called them monsters," Yuvan said. "We called them Deathworlders, and we kept them at the edge of our civilization because their history frightened us. Their strength frightened us. The way they move through the universe frightened us, with their loud voices and their scarred bodies and their endless, restless energy." He paused. He looked around the chamber at the faces of 100 species, species that had never built a weapon, never fought a war, never imagined that they would need to. "And when the darkness came for us," Yuvan continued, "when something from beyond the veil came to devour everything we are, they were the only ones who answered. They did not ask if we were allies. They did not check our treaties or calculate whether we were worth the cost. They heard our cry for help and they came." His voice broke just slightly. He steadied it. 814 of them died so that 47 of us could live. Their admiral flew her ship into the mouth of a god and burned it from the inside. She did this for people she had never met, from a species that had treated her kind with suspicion and contempt for 40 years. And she did it without hesitation, without regret. He looked directly into the broadcast cameras, directly into the eyes of a galaxy that had spent 4 decades keeping humanity at arm's length. "We were wrong about them," Yuvan said. "They are not monsters. They are the shield we never knew we needed. And we owe them a debt that we can never repay, not in 1,000 years, not in 10,000. We can only begin by giving them what we should have given them from the start." He straightened, and his skin glowed with a light that had not been there since before Keth Sauron. "They called for help. The humans answered. It is time we answered them." The vote to grant humanity a permanent seat on the Concord Security Council was unanimous. Not a single species abstained. Not a single delegate hesitated. It was the fastest vote in the Assembly's history. On Earth, in a garden outside the United Earth Navy headquarters in Geneva, a new wall was built. Black granite, polished to a mirror finish, standing 3 meters tall. 814 names were etched into its surface, each one cut deep enough to last 1,000 years. At the top, in letters slightly larger than the rest, Admiral Rena Voss. Below all the names, a single line chosen by the surviving crew of Battle Group Talon, the people who had been there and had come home carrying the weight of those who had not. They called for help, we answered. Commander Akaffer stood before the wall in his dress uniform on the day it was dedicated. The sun was setting behind the Alps, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. He read each name, all 814. It took a long time. He did not rush. When he was finished, he saluted. He held it for a long time, his hands steady, his eyes dry. Behind him, unseen, a Velthari delegation approached the wall. They moved in silence, their translucent bodies catching the last light of the setting sun. In their careful hands they carried crystalline flowers, grown from their own ship coral, shaped by their own light, the most sacred offering their species could give. The first time in recorded history that a Velthari had honored a warrior. They laid the flowers at the base of the wall, one for each name, and the crystal caught the fading sunlight and threw it back in tiny rainbows that danced across the black granite and the white letters and the names of the dead. The stars came out, one by one, above the garden, cold and distant the way stars always are. But they did not seem quite as dark as they used to.